So I don't really have a long relationship with John, so to get a biography, I just emailed him and he sent me one. But it's pretty impressive, and in addition to the one he sent me, all the stuff on our flyer, John has been a farmer dairyman, and correct me if any of this stuff's incorrect, John. A dairyman, integrated pest management specialist, gardener, soil scientist, agronomist, horticulturalist, soil health educator, brewmaster, freelance writer, author, environmental consultant, and researcher. And my favorite, a cartographer. And so I'm going to tell you what I think a cartographer does, John, and you tell me if I'm anywhere correct. And everybody remember that I have 2 small girls, so I watch a lot of Beauty and the Beast. So when I think of cartographer, I think of a big book-lined library with a huge mahogany table with maps everywhere, and he's got like a bunch of cool stuff and instruments out. When you were a cartographer, was it anything like that at all? No? I'm going to choose not to believe that, because my version is way, way cooler than what maybe you did. You're probably on a computer a lot. Maybe you're outside. But other than that, I'll hand it over to John. So,
thank you, Nolan. and good evening. It's nice. I really like this shade. When we were out here just a little bit earlier on the Walk of Life, I like the fact they named it the Walk of Life, because the thing you'll hear me harp about is that soil is alive. It's a biological system, and we need to think about it that way. So I was very pleased that they called it the Walk of Life, because that's really what we were looking at. What we were talking about is how can we bring more things to life in our systems. And I said, modern agronomy is a lot of, what am I going to kill today? What am I going to, I'm going to spray a fungicide, I'm going to spray an insecticide, and I'm not putting that down. Those are all tools. And that's what people need to understand, is those are tools. And they're all very useful tools. But if your soil is dysfunctional and you're not managing it properly, you're going to be forever dependent on those tools. And you'll never restore the system. You'll never fix what's wrong. So, and one of the other things that came up, and I think for this group it's appropriate, is to look at how soil health translates to human health through whatever it is that we're eating. Okay, you are what you eat. And if what you're eating does not have a complete set of nutrients in it, then you're going to be incomplete. And what we're finding out is, if the soil is not functioning, if it does not have its full complement of biology, the plant has a very difficult time becoming complete. Yes, it will produce a yield. It will produce stuff that you can eat, but it will be short of nutrients. It will be quantity, not quality. And particularly if you're gardening, I think a lot of people are interested in, okay, if I'm going to do a garden, I don't only want to grow quantity, I want to grow quality. So you need to think about that. Think about how well is my soil functioning. There you can assess that. We're going to look at one of them here in a minute. But one other thing I was going to add up front here, if you have a question, just go for it. If this turns into a discussion and I could throw this away, that would be great, because we'll probably talk about everything on here anyway. And I'm probably going to talk about everything on here without looking at it. I'm holding it in my hand, but I'm not even looking at it. But so if you have questions, feel free to bring those up. So everyone here, I'm sure, heard the phrase, "Mom's not happy, nobody's happy." Okay? If the soil's not happy, nobody's happy. There's no hydrologic cycle, there's no carbon cycle, there's no nitrogen cycle, there's no phosphorus cycle, there's no water infiltration. Nobody's going to be happy. Nothing is going to work here unless we supply a lot of inputs. And I'm not against inputs because they're a tool. But the thing we have to think about is that Mother Nature has a lot deeper pockets than we do. And we can try to manage this soil in a way it wasn't designed. And we can buy a lot of inputs to address all of these symptoms that we're creating. But sooner or later, the banker's going to say, I'm not going to lend you money anymore. So I'm encouraged by what I see in people understanding this and learning how to improve soil health and manage to improve it so that they can cut their input costs. Because the real bottom line here is going to be an economic one. Mother Nature will wait you out. She'll outspend you. You know, Mother Nature, 1,000 years is nothing to her. So she'll wait until you screw the soil up and you go broke and you're gone, and then she'll come in and she'll fix it. So if we learn how to manage the soil as a biological system and just work with the way it was designed, we can be a lot more productive, we can be a lot more profitable. So farmers aren't going to keep farming, farmers aren't going to be on the land unless they can be profitable. So economics is going to play a big part of this. Okay, so a question I've talked about soil function, and how many of you here farm? Okay, how many garden? Okay, if I didn't see the rest of the hands go up, I'd say, why are you here? But because I do, I'm addicted to gardening as well. But anyway, so what functions do you expect your soil to perform as a gardener, as a farmer? What functions do you expect your soil to perform? What do you expect out of your soil? What do you expect it to do? Okay, grow plants. Okay, grow plants. Nobody wants to answer these questions because that's a trick question. He's going to catch me sooner or later. Grow plants. Okay, what do plants need to grow? Nutrients, water, sunlight. Okay, everybody knows this stuff. So, how well is your soil infiltrating and supplying water to the plants? How well is your soil supplying nutrients to the plants, not you supplying nutrients to the plants? How well is your soil supplying nutrients to those plants? Those are the questions you have to ask, and those are the things you have to look at. It's very easy to determine how well water infiltrates the soil. Just get out your watering wand once. Okay. You can stand in that spot and water just keeps going in and going in and going in. Your soil's probably functioning in that regard pretty well. You can measure, you put a ring in the soil, water in there, time how long it goes in, etc. You know, I'm a nerdy scientist, so I did that. I do stuff like that. My garden will infiltrate about 9 inches an hour. Okay? I want everybody here to imagine it raining 9 inches an hour. It's hard to imagine it anytime, but it's really hard to imagine it now. Okay? Your house would either be gone in some kind of a horrendous storm, or you'd be looking for some lumber to build an ark. But so 9 inches an hour. I don't care how hard it rains. You watch the news. Oh, there was a flood in Iowa because they've had 3 inches of rain in the last week. That water should have all gone in the soil. Why is it running off? That shouldn't be happening. Okay? So it's easy to determine those things, and it's easy to understand how to get the soil to infiltrate water again. How well does it supply nutrients? Stop putting fertilizer down, you'll find out. It might be kind of ugly the first year or two until the soil can regenerate itself. But those are the kinds of things you need to look at, is how well is your soil doing those things? How well is it functioning? So we talk soil as a biological system. If the biology is there, if the plants are feeding that biology in a continued and a sustained way, they'll build nice soil aggregates. Okay, and that's just a $20 word that we soil scientists use for a lump or a clump of soil. Okay, the soil is aggregated into some clump, some crumb, some little block, however you want to describe it. That's almost entirely held together by biologic glues. Okay, when I got my soils degree, and I won't tell you when that happened, but there was only 4 elements on the periodic table: earth, air, fire, and water. But they taught us in soil physics that it was clay that held soil together. Some of the time. It's biologic glues that hold the soil together. That's what actually holds the soil together. So if there are no biological glues, soil gets wet, it collapses. If it collapses at the surface, it seals everything off. Water can't get in. That's what you have on most of the agricultural soils in this country. That's why all the water runs off. That's why the Mississippi River is brown. That's why there's floods, etc. So it's easy to assess soil aggregate stability when the soil gets wet by just dropping some dry soil aggregates in some water, which we're going to do here next. If some of you can't see this, you might want to stand up or step up a little bit. But can I borrow 2? Okay. I'll have you come back here. We'll see if I can do this without tripping over the cord. Okay. Do you want to be better than your sister, or is it okay?
It's okay.
Okay. So what we have here is, and that piece of paper is probably going to blow away. We have 2 samples of soil. This one comes from a place that the soil is very disturbed. It's a very hostile environment for soil organisms. I better get away from this thing or I'm going to get feedback. It's a very hostile place for soil organisms. As a result, there aren't very many soil organisms, particularly the ones that make glue that hold the soil together. These soil aggregates over here come from a place that is actually rangeland that's been well managed for many years. So it's like soil microbial heaven. Okay? Plants, a big diversity of plants, living roots all the time, food all the time, cover all the time. It's a really nice place if you're any type of soil organism. So they make their glue that hold the soil together. If you want to know how well your soil is aggregated, how good a shape it's in that regard, you just take some soil aggregates, dig them up from the surface, let them dry out. Because we want them, the pore space filled with air, so when we put them in the water comes in, and we can test them to see how resilient they are. Okay? So I'm going to have you take that piece of soil there, and I'll have you can grab both of them, throw both of them in there. And I want you each to drop them in there at the same time. So you watch your sister and go. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay? So, what's going on? What can you see? Tell everybody what you can see.
I see that one is fading faster than the other one.
Okay. That's exactly right. And those of you that are up here close enough, you can see that it won't be long, and this one's going to be gone. Okay, the water is moving in, it's replacing the air, it's making the soil weak. Okay, everybody knows soils are weak when they're wet. strong when they're dry. That's why you drive on the sod when it's really wet. Because if you drive on the bare soil, you're going to sink in. Okay? So this soil has almost no biological glue holding it together. The water moves in, takes the place of the air, soil gets weak because it's wet, and it just disintegrates. This one, you can see bubbles coming out of it. The water's moving in, replacing the air. It's pushing the air out of it, but it's not disintegrating. The glues are very, very good, and that aggregate will sit there for the next 2 hours. You could come back tomorrow. It'll still be there. It still won't fall apart. Okay? So that's the test. That's really a very simple test. Anybody can do that to get some idea how well is my soil going to hold together, infiltrate water, etc. Okay? Okay, thank you, ladies. Thanks for your help. Okay, how many of you, be honest, how many of you rototilled your garden this spring? Okay, most of them are over here, so if I run this way, I can probably outrun them. If I was going to design and implement to destroy soil biology to its utmost, it would be a rototiller. Because it shatters all the aggregates. If you're an earthworm, I don't know if that would be a fun ride. But the main thing is it shatters the aggregates that are there. And by doing so, now there's no place for the organisms that were living there, were supposed to live there. They have no home anymore. Okay, to them, a rototiller is an earthquake, a forest fire, and what was the other one that we used to use? Anyway, it's very bad. Okay, it's like an earthquake and a forest fire at the same time. You're not going to survive. The only thing that survives that primarily are bacteria. They're very opportunistic. So if somebody else gets chopped up in the rototiller, they're right there, they'll eat them. They're very opportunistic, but they're very poor glue makers. They're very poor glue makers. And if they do make any glue, it doesn't last very long. So that's the first thing. That's the first big paradigm shift, is to stop doing the tillage, because that's very disruptive. So if we look at the principles of soil health, managing for soil health, it's less disturbance, and that can be physical disturbance like tillage. It can be chemical disturbance, such as applying excessive amounts of fertilizer that short circuit a lot of what the biology is supposed to do. It can be biological disturbance by minimizing your diversity in the soil. Okay, so less disturbance, more diversity. The greater diversity of plants you have, the greater diversity of organisms you're going to have in the soil. Because each plant brings its own set of food that it supplies to the soil organisms. It exudes those sugars through their roots to feed those organisms in the soil. Yeah.
So John, you say don't rototill. Can you give us an alternative to get there rather than doing this tilling? Is there an alternative or two or three that you could use to get to the point that you can plant those things that you want to plant so that you don't have to rototill?
Okay. Alternatives to rototilling. When we were out on the walk of life, we talked about that a little bit, about roots, and we dug up a layer of compaction that was out there. And that layer of compaction was created, who knows when, from all the tillage that happened in the past. And after 11 years of what they've been doing here, that layer of compaction is still there. But if you turn it and look at it, try to look through it, you can see the holes that roots made through that compaction. So the alternative to rototilling is plant as many different species of plants that you can in that soil as a cover crop to try and get fine root systems, tap root systems, as many different kinds of roots as you can in there to start to create pores, start to create pathways for that water to start to infiltrate and keep the soil covered. You apply, basically the answer to your question is apply the other three principles. More diversity, living roots as much as possible, and keep the soil covered. So have lots of different plants, keep the soil covered with growing plants or plant residues all the time. And then you're going to have to just tough it out. When I first moved into the house that we're in, there was a garden area that had been tilled for years. Silty clay soil, if any of you are familiar with that term, it was hard. That soil was very hard. It collapsed basically from all the tillage. And so the first year I decided I'm not tilling it anymore. I'm just going to take the blade of my shovel on edge and I'm just going to scratch a little scratch into the soil, 1/2 inch deep, and I'm going to put my seeds in there. I had to scratch in the same spot about 4 times to be able to scratch down to 1/2 inch. So I put my seeds in there, I covered them up, and I stood there and said, this isn't going to work. This ground is hard as a rock. But the plants grew. Amazingly, they grew. And each year, their root systems made more holes. The biology came back and started building soil aggregates. And it took 3 years before I didn't have to scratch so hard to make a furrow in the soil to get my seed in the ground. You know, it sucked for 3 years. It was difficult. But I knew if I stayed with it, eventually it would get to the point where it would be, the soil would have aggregates, it would be friable enough that I could make it work. So now that it hasn't been tilled in all that time, and I've always had cover on it, I was telling someone earlier that when I harvest my carrots, I water that row of carrots so I can pull them out. And if I can't pull them out, then I'll just dig down just alongside of them a little bit just to loosen the soil, not totally dig the whole thing out, but just to loosen them a little bit so I can pull them out. Well, there's always some soil that stays on the carrots, especially in a soil that has as much clay as mine does. So I take those carrots and I throw them in a bucket of water to wash the soil off of them before I take them in the house. So when I finished doing that, I poured the water off into the garden, and all the soil that was in the bottom of the bucket came out last in a pile, and it was all aggregates. It looked like a pile of black cottage cheese. It was all aggregates. Those aggregates were so durable, like this one here, that they survived me sloshing them around in the bucket, manipulating those carrots, getting all the soil off of them. They survived that. They were still intact. That's how stable they are now. And now when I plant, I can take my hand and I can scratch into the soil to put my seed into the soil. The soil is so well aggregated, but that took time. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be ugly for a couple years as you get into it, but eventually you'll get there. So you just have to decide. You know, you can keep using the rototiller and loosen up the soil and do what you're doing, and you can still grow good vegetables. You can still grow stuff, grow whatever it is that you want. But now that we're understanding how soil biology and plants work together, we're realizing that without that soil biology, those plants aren't able to make all the compounds that they should be making that produce a highly nutritious, a nutrient-dense, if you will, product. So yeah, you can still grow. You say, wow, look at this. I grew all these big broccoli plants. It's awesome, but if the soil biology isn't there, I would dare say that those broccoli plants are missing a fair amount of nutrition that we would like to have. So yeah, it's going to be ugly for the first couple of years. And I mean, I tell people when I talk with with farmers, I ask them, so how long have you and whoever has farmed this before been destroying the soil? Because that's basically what we've been doing. Let's see, 80 years. I say, okay, you got to give me at least 4 or 5 to bring it back. And that's still pretty good. You can bring it back. And here in North Dakota, even our degraded soils can be brought back a lot faster. So I've looked at soils in other parts of the country, and it's going to be a long haul. It's going to be difficult. They've been degraded to where there is no organic matter left in them. There are no aggregates left in there. So to look at those principles and how well are you doing those things? You'll look at your current system and say, well, I have lots of diversity. I always plant different things in different places. I always have living roots, or at least as much of the time as possible. And I always mulch and keep the soil covered. So if tillage is the weak point, then that's what has to be addressed first. And in some cases, you remove the tillage, you're doing a good job on the other 3 principles, that soil will start coming back. Every time we till the soil, as soon as we shut the machine off or walk away, everything that's still left alive in the soil says, okay, let's get to work and start fixing this. Now that they're done, let's get to work and start fixing this again. And I'll throw this at you, and I've thrown this at a lot of people. Think about the fact that there is no tillage operation that directly benefits the soil. We've been doing this for 7,000 years. There is no tillage operation that directly benefits the soil. It'll control weeds. It'll incorporate something that we added to the soil. It'll loosen up the soil enough so we can plant. It'll do all those things, but it won't benefit the soil. It only degrades the soil. So that's the biggest, we talk about paradigm shifts, that's the biggest paradigm shift that you have to wrap your mind around before you can start making some progress. And my neighbors right around me, they look over the fence and they look at what I'm doing and they ask me, well, why didn't you till your garden? I said, I don't need to till my garden. There's no reason to till my garden. And they just walk away because they're like, well, I have to till my garden. Why? I think we've been doing it so long, it's in our DNA that we have this gene that expresses itself that says we have to till the soil. So think about those things. But in the long haul, you're going to have fewer weeds, you're going to have fewer insects, you're going to have fewer diseases because you're going to start to get a balance. As long as you develop a balance, the more living things you have in your system, the less chance there is for any one of them to become a problem. An insect is only a problem when there's nobody there to eat it. Okay? I put a pan of water, especially now. I put a pan of water in the yard next to the garden. The birds come in and they're in that water all day long. And as soon as they get a drink, as soon as they take a bath, they jump in my garden. They walk through my garden. And they eat a lot of earthworms, and that's fine. But I want as many different species of living things in my garden so nobody can get out of control. Nobody can start to become a problem. And the soil can continue to build itself up. So, any other questions?
I have a question. When you started your vegetable garden, to control the weeds, did you have a cover crop, or what did you do to control the weeds?
Okay, it was about weed control. The first couple years, I pulled a lot of weeds, and I say pull because I didn't hoe. I didn't hoe the weeds because you're tilling it. You're basically doing what a rototiller would do, only without gasoline. So I didn't hoe the weeds, because every time you disturb the soil, you're bringing a seed, a weed seed, from where it was smart enough not to grow to where now it's smart enough to grow. So every time you till your soil, there's a whole bunch of weed seeds that say, thank you. I've been waiting for you to bring me up where I can grow. And so you have weeds all the time. But I would water the garden well, not so I would sink in, but so it'd be easier to pull the weeds out, and a lot of mulch. Grass clippings, hay, straw, whatever, just smother everything. That's the easiest. Just smother it with all the residue, all the mulch you can manage. And just be careful not to use things that have a real high carbon content. You want things that even the biology that's there can break down. So grass clippings work a little better early on. Now I put grass clippings in my garden and they don't last 3 weeks. They're gone. The biology just devours them. I have to put something that has more carbon. It slows them down. It's harder to chew a whole bunch of dry bread if you don't have some water to wash it down. So nitrogen helps wash the carbon down when they're trying to eat it. So as your soil gets better, you'll have to use probably a different mulch that won't break down so fast. But by spring, if we have snow cover, by spring the soil in my garden is essentially bare, and I never take anything out except what I eat. All the plants stay there, all the residue stays there, everything stays there. I keep throwing stuff in there, trying to keep it covered, and the biology just devours it all. So at first it won't, but yeah, lots of mulch and pull the weeds, don't hoe them. Good question though.
If you want to start a new area and it's all grass, has been grass for years, or it's alfalfa, what do?
You can till it, which I just said you shouldn't do. Okay? I'm giving you all the options here. You can spray it with herbicide and kill it. If you don't like herbicides, then you don't want to do that. Or you can smother it get some old carpeting or cardboard or things like that. Go to the furniture store and get all the big boxes from the refrigerators and freezers and stuff like that. Lay that down, throw some boards or some rocks or something on top of it for a whole growing season ahead of time to kill the grass from no sunlight. And then the following year, same would be true of herbicides. You spray it in the fall, so it's all dead in the spring. And then in the spring, you just make little slices in the soil. Because I ask people, show me the largest seed that you're going to plant in the soil. And they usually show me a squash seed or something like that. I said, okay, so how big of a hole in the soil do you need to make to get that seed in the ground? Just a little bit bigger than that seed. You don't need to till all of the soil to get that little seed in the ground. Just make a slice with the edge of a shovel. If you have to water it a little bit to soften it up, even when the soil's not that moist, I can usually do it, but moisten it up a little bit so you can make that slice and just put your seeds right into that dead sod. Start mulching. When you do that, after you plant and you look at it, you're going to say, this isn't going to work. This doesn't look right. But it will. Those seeds will grow, and they'll grow just fine. And as that sod decomposes, you're going to get a little bit of a nitrogen kick, probably the second year, not so much the first year. So there's ways you can kill that sod without tilling it, and just go from there. I've added on to my garden a few times, and I'll lay some boards down or whatever, and just kill off some sod, and then I'll plant. Usually I'll plant something there. It's a little bigger seed, like beans or corn or something like that. It's a little easier to plant and manage. But yeah, good question. Any other questions? So we want to wander over there too yet, don't we? Okay. So anything, everybody, your eyes are starting to glaze over. You're just like, how am I going to do this without tilling first?
We're probably 3 years into like a new garden plot, and we've been tilling because it's so hard, the clay soil. And then we're putting like peat moss and adding that in. So how would you add that in without, you would have to till it, right?
Okay, the question is adding, if you want to add something like peat moss. Okay, I'm gonna turn that around. Years ago, not that many years ago, my dad was tilling his garden at the farm back in Wisconsin. And I said, Dad, why are you still tilling? Because I'd been talking about this for, your family's the last one to believe you, because it's like, yeah, you're just a smart aleck. But anyway, I said, Dad, why are you still rototilling the garden? Well, I have to because the ground is hard. And I said, Dad, the reason the ground is hard is because you've been tilling it. He couldn't wrap his mind around that. It just, so at some point you're going to have to bite the bullet, and like I did, where you're going to plant into soil that's hard. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. And you don't need to add those things. Now, if you want to add a bunch of peat moss, or a bunch of organic matter, and till it in one last time, no more after that, one last time, it will help that not be quite as hard after it collapses over the winter. It will be not quite as hard to plant into.
I just have one more question now. Each year, like the ground is so poor that we don't even, like my tomato plants are still sitting there the way they were when I started them this spring. So like I hardly get weeds. I mean, like nothing hardly is growing. So like just adding organic matter or, when it's so poor, so it's so poor even growing.
I would add as much really low carbon nitrogen ratio residues as you can. Fresh grass clippings, anything fresh green material, whatever it is, go mow something that's green and put that stuff down there. It'll break down faster, and it'll add that organic matter faster, until your biology gets going. Once your biology gets going, then that stuff will break down really fast. But to get started, keep that soil covered to keep it moist so those organisms can work. Because when it dries out, like now, they're going to go dormant. So it's not like they're dead or they're gone. They're just dormant. But yeah, I would put a lot of green stuff on, fresh green stuff as mulch on there.
Do you find with using the cover crops and getting the soil healthy that you have to water less?
Watering less once I get the soil healthy. Yeah, because the soil has a lot greater capacity. It becomes more like a sponge. The aggregates are stable, so all those spaces are always there, and the really small spaces are always there. So if you water deeply, that soil can retain a lot of that water for a lot longer period of time. So maybe not less water total, probably a little bit less water total, but less frequently. You know, your efficiency is going to be, especially if you keep the soil covered. If all the water is leaving through a plant, through transpiration, not evaporation, then it's going to become a lot more efficient. But yeah, if the soil, especially if the water can't infiltrate very far, you know, how deep do you run your rototiller? About like that, maybe. Okay, dig that up. When you get home, dig that up, and you will see a layer in there that's like a plate. It'll be about a half to 3/4 of an inch thick. It'll be like a plate that you can just break out of there. If the water can only infiltrate down to that plate and it can't really go any further, then you better be watering every other day, because that's all the soil your plants have to work with. If you can get roots to go through that, you can get the water to infiltrate as deep as it wants to, as deep as it possibly can, and your roots can go down as far as they possibly can. Now you have a lot of water accessible to those plants. So it's kind of two things there. But that's why you have to stop tilling it, because it compacts it down here, collapses it at the top. It's not going to function. You're going to be so limited to put on. And if that's the case, and you have to water more frequently, the odds are more of that water is going to evaporate than is going to infiltrate. So I think that was kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but yeah.
Can you just skip the sod off, or just take the top layer you're putting on grass or something? Can you just take the top layer of sod off and work with it?
How would you do that? If you can do it without causing compaction, yeah, you could do that. And then plant right into that. That would be more work, but yeah, it would be doable, because you basically eliminate those plants. Yeah, and then plant right into that. If you have halfway decent organic matter in your soil, that probably wouldn't be an issue. Some soils that don't have very much organic matter, and you're skimming that off, yeah, you kind of put yourself in a hole, no pun intended, that you're taking a lot of those stable aggregates and that organic matter off. Or if you can pile them somewhere and compost them or something. But so dig a hole first, see what you have to work with. And if you're not going to take off too much of what has decent organic matter, then yeah, that would work.